Hello everyone. It is my pleasure to join the virtual presentation of International Conference ICT for Language Learning. My name is Wei Hing Yip and the title of my presentation is Video Conferencing: Advantages and Limitations in Teaching Intercultural Communication in Foreign Language Education. Since the 1980s, linguists and other scholars in the West have advocated the importance of enhancing students' intercultural communication competence in foreign language education. Teaching of Chinese as a foreign language, CFL, faces similar challenges. Yet, the intercultural communication perspective is a new trend in CFL, and its implementation and evaluation is still under development. So far, the advocates of new trends in CFL have focused almost exclusively on classroom based courses. However, in order to catch up with the main trend of foreign language education, there is also a need to implement the cross-cultural dimension into distant courses at institutions such as in Dalarna University in Sweden, where I currently work. Dalarna University started to provide web-based courses in the Chinese language in 2007. Since 2010, the Chinese language courses have been available only in the distant form using the same teaching materials as the previous campus-based courses. However, the textbooks used in both settings basically followed the traditional grammar-centered approach. Therefore, a pilot study was carried out at Dalarna University to explore the opportunities for implementing a cross-cultural perspective into existing courses and evaluating the effectiveness of this implementation based on the feedback of the students and the experience of the teacher. According to McKellen, the curriculum can be improved through action research, and the teachers and other educators are best suited to conduct such inquiries. Unfortunately, research about teaching CFL in distant mode is extremely limited. Only one provides an empirical study of video conferencing with 8 distant language learners of Chinese, and she explores the capabilities of the video conferencing tool net meeting and participants' perceptions of the new learning environment. According to Wong, the new generation video conferencing tools, such as net meeting, allow for better audio-visual interaction between teacher and students and greatly enrich the learning environment for language learners in virtual spaces. Dalarna University was the first university to offer web-based CFL courses in Sweden. These courses offer several channels of communication between teachers and students, such as asynchronous document exchange, email, text chat on Frontier, the main online communication platform, and our online lectures in synchronous video conferencing, first in Maritech and later on Adobe Connect, providing audio-visual interaction. Despite technical problems which limited the use of asynchronous and synchronous tools online, most of the teaching pedagogies, such as role play, discussions, writing exercises, etc., could be carried out with synchronous video conferencing. This confirms Wong's research and suggests that video conferencing indeed can be a successful tool in promoting students' intercultural communication competence. The pilot study was implemented in spring 2011 as the first attempt to implement the intercultural communication approach into a distant Chinese language course for the beginners at Dalarna University. We call it Chinese 1. To follow the 5 phases of an action research circle demonstrated by Sussman, I first reviewed the current course syllabus, textbook, and the teaching materials. Special attention was placed on the approach and methodology used from the perspective of intercultural communication. The material used in the textbook were also reviewed to see how they reflected the hidden cultural elements in the language. The next step was to make changes in the teaching plan. In online classes of Chinese 1, students did experience a wide range of interactive activities. However, since most of the students are English-speaking Swedes in Sweden, they have limited chances to practice the Chinese language outside their virtual classroom. Therefore, I arranged for each of my Swedish students to interview a Chinese student who is studying at the Dalarna University. The main task for the Swedish students was to use the learned vocabulary and sentence patterns to find out basic personal information about the Chinese students. Swedish students received a list of questions and were instructed to interview the native Chinese students in the virtual classroom. The activity was first attempted on a volunteer base outside of the students' regular class schedule. However, due to the extremely low participation, I decided to implement this activity into the regular course schedule so that in the end, two groups of students, a total of 24 of them, were able to participate in these interviews during the class. A follow-up questionnaire for Swedish students were designed to find out what they thought about the interviews, what type of problems they encountered, and whether their expectations were successfully met. A set of four multiple choice and four open-ended questions allowed the student to evaluate both their experiences in using Chinese during the interviews and the specific internet-based communication technology that was utilized. I also prepared a questionnaire for the Chinese students to learn their views on the effectiveness of this form of teaching the Chinese language and their assessment of the Swedish students' communication skills, again with a focus on intercultural communication. Despite some difficulties, the data that was collected provided a solid foundation for further exploration. Since the majority of the students decided not to participate in the interviews outside the classroom, it was necessary to make this activity a part of a regular lecture series. A short introduction about this activity was given to the Swedish students 1 week before the interviews took place. A briefing was also given to the Chinese students to ensure that they would be capable of participating in the planned video conference interviews. They were also given information about the objectives of the research and their role in the interviews. During the lectures, some students were not willing to join the activity as they claimed that they had not advanced enough to participate in these interviews. Those students were allowed to interview each other in order to fulfill the task of the lecture, but they were excluded from the pilot research. After the interview activity, 10 Swedish students and 7 of their Chinese counterparts submitted the questionnaires. In general, the results showed that the Swedish students were not really aware of the cross-cultural aspect of the communication, as well as their Chinese partners, were focusing mostly on more basic language skills such as pronunciation, listening comprehension, and the use of basic vocabulary. Some students also focused on difficulties with the communication technology, which negatively affected some of the interviews. It seems that in this early stage of language learning, the cross-cultural elements of communication do not have many opportunities to come to the center of attention. Beginners need to use basic phrases and sentence patterns which can be easily understood. The native Chinese speakers, in turn, did not have high expectations for their Swedish interview partners and were happy to clarify unclear issues during the interviews. In general, the Chinese students somewhat managed to understand their Swedish counterparts, or even claimed that they understood them very well. The difficulties in communication were often attributed to typical beginners' issues such as strange pronunciation of words, use of unintelligible words and phrases, limited vocabulary in general, and grammatic mistakes. Chinese students solve these communication problems by writing the words and phrases for the Swedish students on the computer screen or by switching to English and explaining the problem. They also asked the Swedish students to repeat their utterances if they did not understand them. Some of the Chinese students were pleasantly surprised by the oral skills of the Swedish students. Some noted that some culturally related vocabulary was not properly understood by the Swedish students. One Chinese student noted that the Swedish students present things in a strange way and that the responses did not make sense, which could indicate an intercultural communication problem. One example was that a Swedish student referred to his own wife as Tai Tai instead of 妻子, which confused the native Chinese speaker and led him to believe that the Swedish student's family had four generations. Only after the Swedish student told the Chinese student that his wife was older than him did the Chinese student finally understand his meaning. Some Chinese students also noted that some culturally related concepts were not properly understood by the Swedish students, as shown by their vocabulary choice. This indicates that some of the Chinese students could notice issues related to the intercultural aspect of learning CFL even at the beginning level. Swedish students who submitted the forms were generally positive about their experience, even though many of them just somewhat managed to understand the Chinese students. The basic problem was the use of unknown words and phrases by the Chinese students who also sometimes spoke very fast. They also noted their own inability to conduct a longer dialogue due to their limited vocabulary and conversational skills at this early stage of learning the language. In addition, some of them wrote that these conversations with Chinese students provided them with a better understanding of how the Chinese language is used in the real conversations, in contrast to the typical textbook dialogues. From this point of view, their experience could also be related to aspects of intercultural communication. To conclude, in order to enhance the intercultural communication skills of the Swedish students, I added a relatively realistic scenario of an interview with a Chinese student to the regular schedule of the internet-based CFL class. While the stated aim of the activity was to test the learned skill in the real situation with a native speaker, I also wanted to evaluate the sensitivity of the students to the issues related to intercultural communication in the process of learning the Chinese language and to gain insight about how successful their intercultural communication was from the viewpoint of the native speakers. The internet-based nature of the course also had unique challenges. Some Chinese and Swedish students did not participate for varied reasons. The Chinese students were often discouraged by the complicated communication technology, while Swedish students claimed that they were too busy. In a few cases, the technical problems affected the whole activity or simply forced the sections to stop. On the other hand, the internet-based interviews allowed the Swedish students to meet Chinese students in a virtual classroom, which is difficult to arrange when students are located in different parts of the country. According to the principles of action research, the completion of this first circle of the activity signals the beginning of the next one. Further revision and modification of the activity will be carried out in the future implementation of the research. This is the end of the presentation, and thank you for your listening.